Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, January 11th, 2024. This is day 97 since October 7th. And many of you might be able to recognize where I am. I am in the holy and sacred city of Jerusalem. I hope to be able to, in the days ahead, tell you some of the things that I'm seeing, tell you maybe even some of the people that I'm meeting with. I'm following in the footsteps of Christians around the world who, a small delegation, heard the cry of the Palestinian church and came to meet with our brothers and sisters during the most sacred holiday of Christmas to commemorate the birth of Christ, the birth of Jesus, which was not celebrated in Bethlehem this year, but was honored in worship, and yet in solidarity with Gaza, celebrations were canceled. And instead, the church mourned and called for peace and called on the world for a ceasefire for the sake of the people of Gaza, to end the bombing, to end violence against all people, but not only for the sake of the Palestinian people, for Israeli people, for all of the people of the Holy Land, for the sake of preventing a broader regional war. And so please be in prayer. Be in prayer first and foremost for an end to all violence, for a return of the hostages. I got off the airport in Tel Aviv, and as you walk in the entrance hall, the pictures of hostages was there to greet you. And I was moved. I was moved because of if we saw the pictures of every hostage that has been released, of every person that was killed on October 7th, of every Palestinian, and I will talk about the number of deaths in just a moment, but so many people have died. And if we looked at the pictures of each and every one and each and every life that has been affected, all we should say is, God have mercy and enough. And we should call on Israel, we should call on Hamas, we should call on the United States, we should call on any group or person that is continuing the violence and saying that violence is the only answer, to say that is not the answer. So that's the core message we have at Churches for Middle East Peace. It is a spiritual message more than a political one. Please be in prayer for us. We're under attack in a very significant way. I'm not able to disclose now how we're trying to discern the best way to respond. But please be in prayer for us and for so many groups in the midst of just such difficult times. An update of what's happened in the last day: the death toll in Gaza, the health ministry reports at 23,357 Palestinians. Nearly 60,000 people in Gaza have been wounded. More than 100 Israelis and internationals continue to be held hostage. And Dalia Schnedlin, who's a political scientist based in Tel Aviv, said, Israelis like to say that their enemies embrace death, but we love life. And she said, but apparently, truly anyone can commit terrible things. And may our hearts be grieved by that reality, but may it also compel us to celebrate it when people choose peace, to lift up voices that call for the laying down of arms, that call for a ceasefire, that call for an end to violence. Other news, Israeli fighter jets attacked and destroyed Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon on Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. The IDF said, the Israeli Defense Forces, this is according to Haaretz, they retaliated against launches from Lebanon that occurred towards Israel on Wednesday. The IDF confirmed that Israel is behind the killing of Ali Hussein Bourguet, the commander of the Hezbollah drone unit. And the Lebanese parliament speaker, Elias Abu Saab, said that the returning of residents of Lebanon's southern villages is only possible through diplomatic efforts, and that war is not the solution. So we're hearing from Lebanese leaders, from Hezbollah leaders, that they don't desire an escalation of the war. We've heard that from the United States as well. So there's fear that the war might escalate to a broader regional war, but we're hearing that that's not the desire. Secretary Blinken landed in Bahrain for an unannounced visit to meet with King Hamad. We also know there's very important meetings happening in Cairo this week. There has been a delegation meeting there, but very high-level meetings are happening there as well. South Africa and Israel exchanged barbs related to the International Court of Justice proceedings that are supposed to happen at The Hague tomorrow, I believe. As people who once tasted the bitter fruits of dispossession, discrimination, racism, and state-sponsored violence, we're clear that we will stand on the right side of history, South African President Ramaphosa said. The Israeli government spokesperson, Levy, said that Israel will dispel South Africa's absurd blood libel and that the country is giving political and legal cover to the Hamas rapist regime. So that has been happening in the news. The South Africa ministry will have Jeremy Corbyn, who's the former leader of the UK Labour Party, as a part of their delegation as well. What else has been happening? Despite a warning by Israel's Attorney General to politicians to stop making incendiary statements that could be construed as incitement, Likud Vaturi doubled down on yesterday, on a statement he made in December that Gaza should be burned down. That is a direct quote. So he told a religious radio station yesterday, it's better to burn down and bring down buildings than for Israeli soldiers to be hurt. The IDF said its reservist Gaza division has taken over Kirbat Ikaza, a Palestinian village just over the border from Kibbutz Nur Oz. Objects stolen from Nur Oz were found there, a military source said. Israel's security cabinet will discuss last night a deal mediated by Qatar to release Israeli hostages in Gaza in batches in exchange for safe passage out of Gaza into exile for Hamas leaders and an Israeli Defense Forces retreat from the Gaza Strip. So that was just reported. That has to do with the negotiations, but it sounds like it would be an exchange for soldiers leaving the Strip. So that's just discussions in progress. I mentioned the delegation in Cairo that includes Israelis. I do know that there's a Palestinian delegation also that will be traveling there. And it's the idea of a swap of hostages held by Hamas in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and detainees held by Israel. That's a part of that discussion. It would include a temporary ceasefire, not a permanent one. John Kirby, the White House spokesperson, said that Washington still does not support a ceasefire at this time because we don't believe that it benefits anybody but Hamas, but we continue to support humanitarian pauses. This is a reminder that please join us in Washington, D.C. You can also see this online. The 13th, this Saturday, is a day of action. We will have a prayer vigil on Saturday afternoon, calling for a ceasefire, a prayer vigil asking for intervention from God to call for peace and calling on the U.S. government to do so as well. About 10,000 people participated in a rally at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, praying for the release of hostages and the recovery of soldiers. And Benny Gantz of the War Cabinet said that Hamas no longer controls a large part of Gaza and that Gazan civilians do not have a government to turn to, but that if Israel were to withdraw from Gaza, Hamas would regain control. We've been hearing some mixed messages about Israel having defeated so much and having killed so many of Hamas's leaders, but that if Israel were to withdraw, Hamas would regain control. So we've been hearing both of those things from different Israeli leaders. In the West Bank, Secretary of State Blinken met with the Palestinian Authority yesterday with President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah. They discussed minimizing civilian harm in Gaza. They discussed extremist settler violence in the West Bank. They discussed the fact that tax revenues are still being withheld from, they're not being paid from Israel to the Palestinian Authority. Of course, the U.S. government has said they should be, but that's all the U.S. has said as of yet. During the meeting, Abbas told Blinken that Gaza is an inseparable part of the Palestinian state, and we will not allow any to uproot our people in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. There continues to be escalations in the Red Sea, which we have talked about. The UN Security Council was scheduled to vote yesterday on a resolution related to the Red Sea. I do not have an update on that. We also know that in the last 3 months, anti-Semitic incidents in the United States have more than quadrupled compared to the same period last year. I'll talk about that. I wanted to let you know, speaking of anti-Semitic incidents, I got a note, or we received one on the Churches for Middle East Peace Facebook page in response to a video I shared just in the past few days. And I think it's appropriate to share. It was publicly posted, but a woman said, can we talk about the 23-state solution? She said, I'm a mother, a grandmother. I live in Israel. I was born in London. My family in London in the US fled the Nazis. Now my family remains in England and America, and they will probably have to flee anti-Semitism again. They avoid walking around. They avoid wearing Jewish symbols on the streets of London and New York. They are going to have to flee to Israel, which is only 8,400 square miles. The entire Middle East is 5 million square miles. There are 22 Arab countries that surround Israel and a total of 52 Muslim countries in the world. Isn't it time to understand that Jews deserve only one tiny piece of security in this world? It's time to talk about the 23-state solution, 1 state for Israel and 22 states for Arabs. We beg you, please don't push us to commit national and physical suicide. Now, I share this with you not because I think that the 23-state solution is necessarily the answer, but I wanted you to know how I responded, but also I wanted us to hear the cry of Jewish people saying, we need to be safe and we're not, and we have to advocate for the safety and security of all people. And I responded and said, thank you for sharing this small glimpse of your experience. No one should have to live in fear of their heritage, culture, history, or identity. What you described about fearing to wear Jewish symbols is one example of growing anti-Semitism that we are so ardently against. Your story encourages us to be ardent and outspoken against anti-Semitism and all hatred and bigotry. And I mean it. Just the way those 3 young men who were wearing keffiyehs and speaking Arabic in Vermont and then were shot should not have to fear their Palestinian ancestry. Jewish people should not have to fear wearing the Star of David, just as I should not have to fear, I was not fearing, I just hadn't, I should not have to fear wearing the Jerusalem cross, right? And so we have to protect religious freedom, the sanctity and dignity of the lives of all people. And so may we come alongside of our Jewish brothers and sisters and our Muslim brothers and sisters and Palestinian Jewish neighbors to hear anti-Semitism. There is as we advocate for Palestinian rights, there is a growth also of anti-Semitism in the US and around the world. And we have to stand up against it. And in that regard, I'll close. Americans for Peace Now became the first U.S. Zionist group to call for a ceasefire. That was just reported in the news on the 9th, which was just a couple days ago. Left-leaning groups call on President Biden to push transition from war to peacekeeping. And the group's chairman of Americans for Peace Now said continuing this devastating war poses a risk for Israel, Gazan civilians, and the entire region. For the sake of security and the well-being of civilians in Israel and Gaza, the Biden administration must push Israel to bring about an immediate cessation of hostilities and to pivot from war to peacemaking. So may it be so. May we advocate for peace for the sake of humanity, for all people.